People with intellectual, cognitive and developmental disabilities get involved as both victims and suspects or offenders more often than individuals without disabilities. Intellectual disabilities include conditions such as autism and Down syndrome, where a person has certain limitations in mental functioning and in skills such as communicating, taking care of themselves, and social skills.
Autism is a developmental disorder, and by developmental we mean that it starts when the child's brain is still developing and something happens and brain development ceases at some point or is disrupted. So once the development is disrupted, you have key things that are affected in the child's development. The first is usually the communication in the child. You'll always find a communication deficit in the child. The second is usually the social interactions in the child will be affected. And thirdly, the children tend to start having behaviors and mannerisms that are repetitive in character.
Cerebral palsy, being an example of developmental disability, is a group of disorders that affect a person's ability to move and maintain balance and posture. Persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities may have limited language ability, comprehension, and communication skills, and may take longer to process information and have difficulty recalling information and sequencing events. These difficulties have certain implications for the justice system.
And for persons like that, tunasema kuna alternative communication devices. Lakini tunaziona kweli.
Felicia Mboro is a disability rights lawyer and a parent to an autistic child.
And to some extent, this is a problem with the law. It is definitely a problem with the law, the way it's been designed and set up. And at the same time, it's a problem with society's perception of disability. For instance, you'll find certain disabilities, people are unable to communicate. Or if they do communicate, they talk like they're drunk. So then you end up arresting this person. He's trying to communicate to you in his language. And because he sounds like a drunk person, the society ends up having them arrested for being drunk and disorderly. Or you find these acts of indecent exposure. Certain persons with autism have tactile issues. Their skin is very sensitive. So certain materials will irritate them. Well, this person might have left the house dressed, and then when the irritation becomes too much, they will take off their clothes. And unfortunately, they will end up being arrested as being indecent.
Watoto wakienda wafanye kitu, unaona wanasema ni yeye. Ukimuuliza ulifanya nini? Ulichukua kitu fulani, anakuambia hapana. Lakini sasa sababu ataweza kuexplain kutoka hapo, unaona sasa unakuwa na time ngumu. Sababu mtoto utafeel tu vibaya. Juu hakuna mtu ana-understand, ni wewe tu.
Pendo Furaha, not her real name, is a mother to a child with autism who she says was wrongfully convicted as the child couldn't defend nor express himself as the police and the society would have wished.
Wakaniita wakasema ati mtoto wangu ako kwa police station na anachapwa na polisi. Sasa mimi singefikiria anything na mtoto wangu na polisi na nini.
We do realize that persons are getting arrested not because they committed a petty offense, but because they just exist as a person with disability. And in their world, they're doing the right thing. To their society, they're doing the wrong thing.
Nikaenda police station. Nikaenda nikakuta polisi sasa wenye walikuwa on duty. Nikawaambia mimi naitwa fulani. Wakaniuliza, wewe ni huyo, wewe mama ya huyo mtoto mwenye ameletwa hapa alikuwa anaripu watoto wa wenyewe huko. Nikawaambia mimi nimekuja, nimeitwa na watoto. Na mimi hata sijui kama mtoto wangu kuna kitu.
Most law enforcement officials do not receive training on how to properly question suspects with intellectual disabilities, which frequently result in suspects with intellectual disabilities giving false confession, which was the exact case for Pendo and Hassan.
She was actually chased away. She was chased away and she was told, "You're the one who is breeding a rapist in this community. You should look for a wife for this child." So it was, the mother was, she was put in a very awkward, in a very inhuman way at that particular time, because even at that time she was not allowed to see the child, to know even how the child is. Even after showing the card of the National Council, still she could not be given access.
Kitu alikuwa amefanya. Wakaanza kunitukana, nikawaambia mimi, nikawauliza huyo mtoto mwenye alikuja huku anaitwa aje, wakaniambia majina yake, kumbe mtoto wangu hata alipeana jina si yake. Unajua, walimshika wakaanza kumchapa, hawakuwa wanajua ajui misi. Okay, hakukuwa na mtu alikuwa ali-explain mtoto wangu vile yako. Sasa mi nikajaribu kuambia mtoto wangu anakuanga na shida, na mi mtoto wangu hata hawezi kuji-explain. Nikawauliza sawa, nikamwambia maybe hiyo jina ni yake, maybe alichanganyikiwa vile mulimshika na vile alikuja huku akaogopa mpaka akasahau jina yake. Nikawauliza na huyu mtoto mwenye ameletwa anaitwa aje, wakaniambia. So nikaona najua huyo mtoto, nikawauliza aje na kwa nini hakuna mtu alikuja kuniita ama kuniambia, na huyo mama wa huyo mtoto anajua kwa plot yetu. Nikawauliza kwa nini hakukuja kuniita, ama akakuja akapewa namba yangu akaniita. Wakaniambia we toka hapa, uenda utakuja kesho.
In most cases, the society and law enforcement officials fail to understand behavioral characteristics that are linked to intellectual disability. From this ignorance, that who suffers is the person with intellectual disability.
We are dealing with a child who psychologically is different from the way an able person can be able to understand that why I'm here. And this is the police station. An intellectual child who has challenges with intellectual will not understand I'm in a police station. And this is a child that walks freely. You cannot be able to tell the child, this is your space and this is not your space. So the first thing that the mother should understand and the police should understand, in spite of what this child has done or not yet done to be proved about the two situations, the mother and the child should have that access in front of the policeman for the child to be given that psychological part, that we're in this situation because of this and this. And this thing, the child needs assurance. But once you start bombarding the child with questions like, you're a murderer, you're a rapist, and then the way you're talking to the child, these children need to be addressed in a certain way. Maybe you need to address the child looking at the eye contact, because the mother is going through therapy and they are trained by the therapist. This is the way you address your child. Kama amekosea, you address her looking like this or like this, because they do understand. It's not that they do not understand, they do understand in their own special way. And since the police system that we're having in Kenya does not understand these children, let the mother come in, because at that time she'll have to act like now the therapist to the child.
We are all equal under the law. Article 27 of the Constitution of Kenya says we are all equal under the law. So just because you arrested me for a crime I committed, irrespective of my disability, process me like a person and not like a person with disability. Give me reasonable accommodations to be able to communicate. Reasonable accommodations means give it to me in a language I understand. If I need support, find me a support person to help me communicate. Put me in an environment where you can deal with my anxiety so that I can be able to understand what it is you are telling me. And after that, once you establish the truth of actually what happened, then proceed according to the law. And in this particular case, children with disabilities more than ever cannot be interviewed in the absence of their parents.
Pendo's son had to spend nights in police custody. She did not know what to do nor who to turn to for help, for in the eyes of the police, his son was a suspect and his physical behaviors and appearance made him guilty.
Saa mi nimeka, sasa niko na stress, nashindwa nitafanya aje. Hawakuniambia anything, ama naenda na mtoto, nikamuuliza na mtoto wangu anapelekwa kwa koti ama ni aje. Sasa sababu ni asubuhi naambiwa watu wanapelekwa kwa koti, nashindwa sasa mtoto wangu akipelekwa kwa koti ataenda kusema nini? Hata akisomewa anything na judge haelewi, atajua kujibu, hataelewa ni nini judge hata anamwambia. Sasa hiyo tu ako huko ananiambia tu mam, akituambia wanipe ruhusa niende nyumbani, hata ajui ni nini anaambiwa amefanya. Unaona ako huko tu. Sasa hiyo niko na stress. Sasa ndio nilikaa.
With their desire to please authority figures, they are very fragile to being influenced during interrogations and sometimes confess to crimes they did not commit. Many persons with intellectual disabilities are spending years in prison for being convicted wrongfully in the court of law.
People forget that just because I have a disability, I'm still a person and I need to be respected as a person. So even if it's a child, he has a disability, he is still a child. And the law says where a child commits an offense, what is supposed to happen is you're supposed to present this child as soon as possible before the court. And secondly, you have to inform their parents. You cannot interrogate a child in the absence of their parent. But however, when it comes to children with disabilities, because they have challenges communicating, they can't talk, they can't express themselves, they probably don't even know their name. And for that reason, a lot of people get tired, they don't want to deal with it. So the parent will not even be informed. You will not even know your child has gone missing until maybe, hopefully, if a neighbor saw the person and tells you what happened. But in most cases, that's why you find a lot of missing children tend to be children on the autism spectrum, because they can't express themselves. The parent was nowhere near the environment when they were arrested or taken, and that's how they end up disappearing in the system. And that's what almost happened to this child. He's just lucky that a neighbor witnessed what was going on. Again, despite the fact that the parent was not informed that the child had been arrested by the police, also the child was not taken to to court immediately as required by law. So you can already see the discrimination aspects that happen when you're dealing with a person with disability versus a regular person who's just committed a crime. And that is where the bias and stereotypes becomes a human rights violation. It's an issue of discrimination.
While in contact with criminal justice services, persons with intellectual disabilities may appear to agree to an instruction and then not comply because the instruction was not adequately understood. Further, a person with an intellectual disability may answer questions in the way they think the questioner wants them answered, regardless of what they consider to be the truth of the matter.
And in most cases, you find it's the law that has actually put these barriers in place. Barriers like communication, barriers like access to the court, physical access to the court, barriers like access to a lawyer. And when you talk about communication, I have to largely stress the issue of language. Language does not mean that you speak to me in English or Swahili or whatever tribe I come from. Language for persons with disabilities means you have to simplify it to a way that I can understand. One of the cases that I like highlighting is the issue of the word shika. In society, we have used the word shika to mean defilement. But if you look at the original use of the word as Kiswahili intended it, it means touch a person. Here you are dealing with a person with an intellectual disability who understands basic language skills, but when you go to court, the offense is read to him, translated in Swahili to mean ulishika mtoto, did you touch this child is what the person will understand. But what the court is intending is, did you defile this child? And persons with intellectual disabilities, like I said, need simple language. So the answer here will be, yes, I touched the child. And that's how we end up with a lot of people in the criminal justice system for offenses they did not even commit, but just because they did not understand the language of the court.
Whether guilty or not, another factor that implicates them according to the Kenyan law is the clause where one has to be fit mentally before standing any trial. In most cases, they are not found fit due to the intellectual disability. Here is where many spend years in mental hospitals.
Not fit to stand trial, it means you can't even take a plea. So essentially the court will send you back to Mathare Hospital most times, or whatever local hospital is nearby, for you to be treated until you are ready to stand trial. Now, we do know that there are people who will never be fit to stand trial. So it simply means you end up in a psychiatric facility until, as and when you're either fit to stand trial. And that's how we are ending up with people in the system for stealing maize from a neighbor in 1999. And they're still in the system, waiting to be fit to stand trial.
This case represents many other cases in Kenya where persons with intellectual disability are behind bars for lack of understanding from the justice system.
Mtoto alipelekwa mara ya kwanza, kesi haikuenda through sababu kuna evidence senye kuria kwenye alikuwa kwa polisi hawakuwekanga kwa azikuwekwa kwa faili yake, zilikuwa zinakosa. Wele sisi tulikuwa tumepeana vitu zote zake za kuonesha na ako na shida. Sasa kutoka hapo tena akarudishwa tena huko ndani tena.
Even the parent is not there, but the child is being frog matched to the police station. Tumepata akifanya na alikuwa anafanya. But when the doctor's review come, that was not the case. So we are finding that these children right now, they are facing discrimination from people who should actually be guiding them and protecting them.
According to Advocate Felicia Mboro, the Kenyan law has not well incorporated persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and in many cases, the law is not well interpreted for them.
If a person with disability does commit a crime and is arrested, the next thing we're assuming they go to the court. Now, when they get to the court, that is where everything starts falling apart. There is no requirement for anyone to be assessed as to whether they have a disability. And this is something that really affects persons with mental disabilities more than any other group. So when you see me seated here, you cannot tell whether or not I have a disability. You will make assumptions based on what you see. So it is up to the court to use its discretion to determine whether or not someone needs to go for a mental assessment report. So if indeed, and in most cases you will always know, someone will do something after they've been through the process, they will be in an anxious state, and you can clearly see that this person is not in a good condition. So the court will order a mental assessment. Two things can happen here. You'll either be found fit to stand trial or not fit to stand trial. If you're fit to stand trial, then the case will proceed to hearing, prosecutor presents his evidence, and depending on the outcome, you can be found guilty or not guilty. Now, if you're found guilty but insane, that is another place where you can end up in trouble. Because if you are guilty but insane, originally under Section 166 of the Criminal Procedure Code, you used to be sentenced to serve at the president's pleasure. Unfortunately, this section was declared unconstitutional, or fortunately, depends on how you interpret it, which left a legal lacuna that I'm sure the prosecution office is trying to figure out how then to proceed from there.
Wrongfully convicted persons with intellectual disabilities is a violation of their rights. In this case, a lot can be done to avoid such cases, awareness creation, especially to the law enforcement officers, being key.
A lot of the crimes, and I'm using crimes carefully here, against persons with disabilities are not crimes. You will realize it's based on the society's perception of the person. For instance, you walk into a room, you find me with a minor, a young boy who's 5 years old. I so happen to be naked, and you decide the situation for yourself without questioning what is going on here. And that happens a lot. I'm not trying to justify or explain anything, but if people would take 5 minutes to just break down the situation first before jumping to conclusions, it will save a lot of people with disabilities from the justice system.
An enabling environment can also be created for persons with intellectual disabilities to freely express themselves in the court of law, with interpretations presented to them for easier understanding.
So it's about time we all started thinking about differentiating the two, especially when it comes to people with mental disabilities. Despite the fact that I might have a disability does not mean that I don't have a brain, I can't use it. I just need the supports to get through this system.